Hello, Susan Corbett, Custom Machine Quilter. This time, let's talk about a really simple design scheme. This means custom quilting, but no background quilting, because this quilt doesn't really need it. And the client wanted something simple, and I don't blame her. The fabric is doing a lot of work all by itself. So here is the main block, and I'd normally quilt that whole star, but this time I thought let's do something different. Quilting all around that star is an interesting way to get this done. So we picked out this leafy design, and I tried it out 2 different ways and chose the second way. I thought it would just be more interesting to use that alternate block as a good place for that motif to go. And then I did continuous curve inside that little star. I know a lot of quilters are really resistant to stabilizing, ditch quilting. It's not any fun, it's tedious, it's hard to do sometimes, but I think it's imperative. I have stabilized most of the body of this quilt, but I left that bottom row part of it unstabilized, just so you could see the difference. And I've got the motif in there, and I've quilted continuous curve in the stars. And what you're left with is this puffiness in here, all this unquilted part, as opposed to here where it is ditch quilted. I think leaving it unquilted just makes it lumpy and erratic and weird, whereas adding the ditch quilting makes it seem a lot more uniform, buttoned down. It just looks a whole lot better. So I think it's well worth doing. It makes for a better quilt, and I think you get much better results that way. Now onto the alternate blocks around the perimeter of the body of the quilt. I could have done partials of the motif used in the alternate blocks, but I thought it would be more interesting to put some feathers in there, because I know I can crank those out really quickly. People like feathers. It makes sense in this traditional quilt. And they might look better than just half of a design. It was a way to incorporate one more design element without going to a whole lot of trouble. So I quilted the corners first and then moved on to the sides. And I can quilt this in one continuous path by retracing my steps in the ditch between the body of the quilt and the border. So these feathers are no big deal. There's no flourishes here. And they fill in the spaces nicely. They're larger where there's space for them to be large. And it takes up the space inside those stars, as it were. So there's less unquilted space. Onto the border. I just took off doing these lines from left to right, but they're going to change directions in the middle. And it didn't work out. Like, I'll do anything to not do math. And here was the result. The center of the lines does not match the center of the quilt. So this turned out to be a case of I have to relearn how to quilt every once in a while. And so As a freehander, a lot of times I totally get away with just going for it, and spatially things work out. And that was not the case repeatedly on this quilt. We settled on this 3-line diagonal line plan because I love it. It gives a wonderful texture. It looks so beautiful. And it's very traditional, very 19th century. But lines are incredibly easy to mess up in innumerable ways. So this is going to be a case of do what I say and not what I did. That one center that didn't exactly hit the mark on the center was not too horrible that I wanted to rip it out. But I took extra care to make sure that I got it right on the 3 other sides. So what I want to say here is to get those lines done without marking and without doing math, quilt in some corners and then put in the centers and then fill in the lines in the middle. I can get away with not having perfectly even spacing in there because what I've learned over the years is that the eye sees what it thinks is there, not what really is there. And as long as the spacing increments are not wildly off, then you think they're accurate. So as you can see, just looking at the ruler and, what it lines up against and how parallel it is to the lines I've previously quilted. And then when you start quilting, that ruler can slip. Those are the ways in which the lines get really, really off. So to pull off this plan, I'm quilting 3 lines that are on a 45-degree angle. They're about 1/4 inch apart, maybe a little bit less. So 3 altogether, and then I leave a space of about 3/4 of an inch empty, and then start over with those 3 lines. So I like to put in the center 45-degree angle and then fill in the middle of that, and then move to the outer part. Now, all the fabric in the border is just one piece of fabric. It might look like it's pieced, but it's not. And I could have quilted each band of color separately, but that is not in keeping with a simple design scheme. And I could have opted for some other design over that busy border print, but I think it would have fought with the border print. Whereas lines still allow you to see the print, and it doesn't take away from that print. So what's going to happen here is you can tell how this is where, despite my best efforts to keep it all nice and even, it's going off the rails. It's easier to see from this viewpoint, easier than from where I was. And so there's my drafting tool that I was using to see if the angle was accurate or not. And that did help, but it wasn't foolproof. So I did end up unpicking some of this quilting, not very much. I did have to redo it. But in the end, I don't think it's going to detract too much from the overall look of the quilt. This is a gift that the maker devised as a Christmas present. And the end result, I think, was pretty good. The thread here, like, this was one of those rare moments where I could use one color thread throughout the whole quilt. And it's a beige that just disappears into the quilt. Of course, whatever color thread you use, lines will always show up. But you're seeing the line and not so much the thread color. Now, why go to all the trouble of doing straight lines in a simple design scheme? Well, simple does not mean fast and inexpensive. It just means simple. I thought this was what the quilt needed, and I think it was well worth all the trouble. The end result looked really good. And here in a second, when we get to see the back of the quilt, I think you'll see what great texture those lines impart. Really beautiful stuff. So here's the finished product. The client was elated. She loved it. And I hope her recipient is as well. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you like what you're seeing here. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you next time.